My name is Chris Cole, and I've been with the Raleigh Astronomy Club since 2007. So been at it for a while, and I've done basically any kind of astrophotography or astro-imaging. You'll hear us call it more imaging than we do photography around here in this kind of hobby. But before that, of course, I bought a telescope because, you know, I graduated, had a job, and I was about to get my tax return. So it's like, well, God, I've always wanted a telescope, now I can do it. So bought a telescope. It was purely moved around by hand, and, you know, it's called Dobsonian. Maybe some of you know what that is, type of telescope. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just pointed at different things. I said, okay, over here's a galaxy, and, you know, because I was doing it by hand, it took forever to find it. But one of the nice side effects is it made me learn how the sky works. Like, when you look up the sky and you see the stars moving, what do you have to keep in mind? It's not the stars moving. What is?
Yeah.
The Earth, right? So, yeah, so that was one of those things that was kind of frustrating with that. However, the lower the magnification you go, the less it's apparent, and that's one of the ways to get introduced into astrophotography is just to do wide field, short focal length or low magnification, if you want to call it, imaging of the night sky. And it's more cost effective than going out and buying all this telescope equipment where the cost could just become, for lack of a better word, astronomical. So, yeah. So, but anyway, yeah, so that was back in 2007, and the thing that made me get hooked is that one day, this is 2007, I turned 30 that year. So 2007, yeah, I was doing my best, learning how to read star charts and pointing at anything in the night. Anytime I saw that, even if it was cloudy, if I saw a star in the sky, oh, let's get it out, because I was really enthusiastic about it. Nowadays, it's like, it shouldn't be cloudy unless it's raining. Otherwise, get away, just give me some clear skies. But anyway, but I pointed at the constellation Leo, and I saw this one star that was there, and I looked at the star chart, and I was like, it's not on the star chart. I was like, okay, so I pointed the telescope at it. It was like a goldish color, a little bit. But some of the people in here, if you have a little bit of amateur astronomy experience, I'm not standing in front of that too much, am I? A little bit. Get out a little bit. Get over here. So if you have a little bit of amateur astronomy experience, you'll probably notice that some stars are like a little on the blue side, red side, or orange side, or yellow side. So I was like, oh, well, what is that star? So I steered it over there, and I looked through the scope, and I was like, holy explicative. It's Saturn. First time I had ever seen it, nice rings, low magnification. I only had one eyepiece at the time. That was one low magnification eyepiece, so it was really tiny, but you could see the rings really well. You could see its brightest moon, Titan, really well. And I turned 30 that year. Okay, getting back to that, I look back, just like, oh, okay, yeah, what's some good facts about Saturn? So I look at it, and one lap around the sun, one orbit around the sun for Saturn, it's close to 30 years. So that's where it was when I was born. So it's like, God, wow, I'm hooked now, So it's like, what can we do next? I go in and I get my point-and-shoot camera, try to hold it up to it, and I got some, nice blurry images of what everybody would know is Saturn. So it's like, well, what else can we do? So I go in and I get a lot of duct tape and just come up with all kinds of ways to, make the camera up to the eyepiece. We call that afocal imaging. It's not the best in the world, but you can get some things that are meaningful out of it. And then after that, I was like, okay, what else can we do? And then it just skyrocketed out from there. But this is a good starting point. This is where I did not start, and probably should have, but can't really see the rings of Saturn and this kind of stuff. So anyway, okay, so they allocated 2 hours for us. I don't know if it's going to take that long or not, but how many people in here have photography experience already? Okay, so the bulk of you. So yeah, this is going to go quick. So basically, I'm just going to go over what are some of the most obvious points that you would need to take into consideration when taking pictures of the night sky. Mainly, well, it's dark, so you're going to have to do some tweaking of light collection settings on your camera. Okay, so what can you do? So this is over at my in-laws' place. They have a strawberry farm, and there's the back of their barn, which they call the strawberry stand. And these are star trail images, which if everybody knows, like we said before, you know, the Earth is moving, not the stars, but the stars move with the sky because the Earth is, you know, turning. So over time, if you do a long exposure, yeah, you're going to see the stars sort of streak across your image. And so that was the whole point of this. And so does anybody know why that one star right smack in the middle is not moving?
Polaris.
It's Polaris. Yeah, that's the North Star. It does move a little bit.
You dialed it in pretty good there.
Yeah. Well, I did my best. You know, well, I'll brag. I mean, I know how the night sky works, and I know where everything is. Okay, here we go. So anyway, so you can do star trails. Next thing you can do, now this is a little over the top. You can do solar eclipses. Obviously, you want to use a filter. That's the #1 thing before you even consider attempting doing a solar eclipse. This picture is a little deceiving because one of the recommendations I would have for doing quote wide field astrophotography is to the longest focal length rather that you would want to do for wide field astrophotography would be 200 millimeters in my opinion. Okay, this was done at 600. So, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is using a bracketed technique. I was able to get the sun's corona to show up really well at 600 millimeters. However, what would have been more impactful is had I done this with like a 200 millimeter lens, yeah, the eclipsed sun would have been smaller, but the corona would have been way out there. You could see a lot from it. So this is another photo op that you can do, and I don't know if anybody recognizes where this is. I had to fit it to the screen here so you don't see the whole thing, but this is an astro nightscape. This is I think it's called the Veterans Memorial in Cary, close to, right off Harrison Avenue. And here we have the moon, and two stars in conjunction with the moon, both stars in conjunction with the moon. You have Venus and Mars. So obviously Mars is the redder one. And then long exposure nightscape. And this is at Mesa Verde. This was taken by Joe Pettit. And again, this is just a camera and a tripod, and I was able to get the Milky Way to show up there. Okay, so first things first, know your camera. Okay, so I'm from the Raleigh Astronomy Club once again, and some I already recognize some of the faces around here are also from the Raleigh Astronomy Club. And just to null disclosure, most of us we use Canon cameras. So that's probably the most well-known brand that you'll see when doing the astrophotography. So is there a reason? The best way I can say, best way I can answer that question is that that's pretty much how it started. Most of the people who got started in astrophotography using a digital camera, they were using the Canon brand. There are Nikon users out there, like Joe Pettit. Some of his photos I'm going to show are almost all Nikon pictures. There's no reason why Nikon cannot do what I'm about to show you. Okay, it's not. We're just biased towards Canon DSLRs. What I mean by that is most people in here are going to be using Canon cameras, or in the Raleigh Astronomy Club will most likely be using Canon cameras.
It's also software.
Yeah, software. So.
Software, if you do computer software that you want to interface with your camera, Canon was the first kind of camera that people wrote software for.
Yeah,
so.
and it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't deliberate. It's just what people that got started in using digital cameras in astrophotography, most of them were Canon users. So, I mean, that's just the way it worked out. So. Anyway, so first 3 points here are all about how do we collect the light from a very dark object. So you need to know what aperture is, or FStop. You need to know what exposure length is. You need to know what ISO gain is, and also one important thing while you're taking your image is what format you should take, which is RAW. Okay, so what is aperture or FStop? Your aperture setting allows you to collect as much physical light to hit the camera sensor. Your aperture setting can make focusing challenging, and to demonstrate that, your aperture setting can expose the optical limitations of your lens. Okay, so right over here, I'm glad they have this in here. I should have tested the marker, hopefully it works. So let's say you have the iris, which controls how much light comes in and hits your sensor. So let's see, let's do this. Oh, of course it doesn't work. Okay, well, anyway, so let's say that, let's see.
Maybe we have one over there?
Actually, why don't you stand up? Okay, stand over there. So I already know this guy, Ramiro. Anyway, say hi. Okay, we're going to pretend Ramiro is the sensor of a camera, his face. Okay, so here's our sensor, right? His eyeballs, well, I guess that's pretty analogous. There you go. His eyeballs are retina, are the camera sensor. But anyway, the light's coming in like this, right? So your iris is going to dictate how much light hits the sensor, right? So the more light you bring in, obviously your f-stop is lower. Your iris, which can go in and out, your iris is termed wide open, okay, for obvious reasons. It's wide open, right? So you have more light able to pass through and hit the sensor, right? Okay. Now, if you lower your f-stop value or bring it to, or kind of stop it down and bring the number up to, say, like, let's go out on a limb here, f10. Well, you go from wide open to something like this, okay? You're collecting less light, and so less light is going to get in, and that's whenever the other settings that allow you to collect light become more important. Okay, so there's trade-offs between these three settings. Right now we're talking about f-stop. So let's show you one of the few caveats of f-stop. Okay, oops. So let's see. We'll go to this. Okay, so here I have set up a Canon T3i, and this is the software that comes with. It's called EOS Utility, and what I'm going to do, it has a 50mm lens. So go to live view shoot. It works? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so there you have this chair over here, and here's my camera case and everything. So right now I have this lens at its lowest f-stop value, or f1.4. Okay, so that's as wide as that iris is going to get. Okay, so it's letting in a whole lot of light. Obviously, it's really bright, considering how dim we've made this room a little bit. So, but one of the caveats that I was talking about is that focusing can be a little tricky, and the reason why that is that you remember from like grade school all the way up to high school, when they're showing how your eyeball lets in light, and it hits the image that you're looking at, hits the retina, which is equivalent for us in our cameras is the camera sensor. It comes in and crisscrosses, right? So if your iris is wide open, it's going to crisscross like that, okay? Which means your focal plane is right there, and you have to get right spot on to where that crisscross is, right? So, however, when you start to lower your f-stop, let's go back, right here we have f1.4, the chair is clear, but the wall is not, okay? So hopefully this will work. So we're going to bring up exposure, that's bringing it down. Okay, so something like that, and then we're going to lower our f-stop, or no, we're raised f-stop number. So right now, what happens is that the focus becomes a little easier to focus on things that are far away and up close. Okay, they call, I guess in camera circle or photography circles, they call that depth of field. Okay, so you're able to focus on things a little easier far away and close up. So the reason why that is again, going back to the crisscross, right? With the light coming in and hitting the sensor, or with our eyeballs, the retina, it's now like this because the iris has gotten smaller, okay? And the light is only able to come through that small little peephole and go into our sensor. But the downside is you have to raise your exposure, you have to raise that, or you have to raise your gain to get more light to hit the sensor, okay? So in astrophotography circles, we like to keep our f-stops wide open. So let's see, is it this way? No. We'll go back, and there you go, we'll blow out the image. So, and this guy, nope, keep getting that wrong, okay. So right about there. Now, can someone tell me why why focus is not so much important in focusing on something that's in the foreground versus something that's far away?
In general, or for this?
For this kind of work right here.
You don't need anything in the foreground.
You don't necessarily need anything in the foreground, and if you do, it's most likely going to be some structure that's already far away, which means that your focal plane is going to be way out there, and your focus is going to be pretty close to infinity. Okay. Some camera lenses that I've noticed, it's can be a little less than infinity. Okay, so the best way to judge it is when you're focusing your camera, you obviously need to find something really bright in the night sky. Hopefully you can find a really bright star. This is probably one of the hardest things about doing wide field photography with just a tripod and a camera, is actually getting it to focus. So, but you know, if you more or less learn how your camera works, like we were initially saying, that shouldn't be as much of a problem. Also, you can get away with softer looking stars just a little bit. It won't matter so much, but in general, yeah, focusing can be tricky. And if your f-stop is wide open, that'll just make it all that more trickier. But
So you're typically doing manual focus for everything?
you have to manually focus for everything. Yeah, I was going to get that's
Sorry.
later on down. So, yeah, no, that's okay. No, completely okay. And there's some tools that you can use to make the focusing easier. One of them is called a Batten-off mask that they actually can use, that they actually make for camera lenses. You brought one, right? Yeah, I'll get to it later. That's okay.
Okay, well, I've got some to pass around.
So anyway, okay, let's go back to the presentation. Let me turn off my camera. Oh. Okay. Yes, sir.
Focusing, I found works very well for me. If you get your infinity focus in the daytime
Mm-hmm.
and take your lens down to that mark, when you're shooting stars, they come out really, really good. But you've got to get that focus. Don't use the infinity mark on the lens because they're not accurate enough. You got to do something in the daytime, far away. Get your infinity on your lens, on the barrel. Put a piece of tape on it and mark it, and go shoot your stars. Works really
So everybody got that? I mean, that's really helpful. Okay.
Works well.
Actually, I've done that with my telescope, so but I didn't
I do
really
that
think
with my
about that with lenses.
telescope,
Yeah. So, yeah. I was kind of bad with my telescopes. I would scratch, actually, a little hash mark on my draw tube just to see where, yeah, exactly where it should line up.
Pencil mark when I take the barrel of the scope, focus barrel, I put a pencil mark on it. I'll tell you what, it's just about right there every time.
Mhm.
I have real good luck with that system.
Come on.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You said that astrophotography used to open wide,
Use what?
open f-stop wide.
Yes, very wide.
And,
Okay.
Because of
Because well, you want more light to come in and hit your sensor because
Yeah,
these are
but-
very dark
but
objects, right?
when you adjust the focus,
Yeah.
that means the wide angle depth of field is too narrow.
It gets very narrow, yes,
Yeah,
okay,
I
but
mean-
like he was saying, there's ways that around that to make it easier. Like he's saying, look at something in the sky during the day, like a cloud or something, or a building that's really far away, or a tree that's really far
I
away.
live in a farm area, so I use the silo for my farm across the
By the
street.
sign in, you can get the, he's
Anything
gonna
works.
send handouts.
So anyway, yeah, if you can focus on something during the day, okay, that's really far away, look at how your look how far you've moved your focus ring on your lens. You can get an idea of mostly how spot on your focus is going to be during the night when you need those stars that are a little harder to see through the viewfinder, or if you're lucky, you can have something like this that'll make it easier. Okay, but that's one of the most important things in this kind of work. Okay, that's why I'm going over these three different settings: f-stop, gain, and exposure. You need as much light as you can get to collect onto that sensor. Okay, with all that light coming in, you have to have your iris wide open. Okay, so like f1.4 or f10. F10 is not going to work very well. Okay, you need that f1.4. Okay, actually, one thing I'll mention when you go to longer focal lengths, when we're talking about f-stops, for anything 200 millimeters and above, I would recommend f4. okay? Because your focus can shift throughout the night, and the reason why that is just thermodynamics, okay? If your lens elements start to cool off, the distances between them, okay, are going to change, and because the distances between your lenses are changing, your focus is going to change, okay? But you only really need to keep that in mind for mostly just long focal length lenses. I would say 200 millimeters or more is where that's something that you need to keep in mind, okay?
Excuse me, one more question.
Yeah.
Why ask? Because of I never shoot the star before. Okay, I shoot the moon. I shoot the star near the moon, and that's it. And it's but I shoot a lot of landscape and the buildings. That means my teacher say that set up F16 or F like that because the photo is sharp.
Yeah. So
that means why not set up shoot the star instead of F4 or F 2.1.2 or something like that. Why not set up F11 or F16 that is sharper, and we set up the high ISO. I don't know.
okay, well, we're going to talk about ISO, okay? So, but that's the only point I can drive home is that the wide open your aperture is, okay, your iris that you're going to open up, that's the best way that you're going to, that's the most you're going to get out of this hobby, okay? Because you need to get that light in there, okay? And so the only thing that it may cause problems with as far as focus goes is that, yeah, you may be focused on the stars. If you're trying to focus on a foreground object, it needs to be big and far away, okay? So, although some people, what they'll do is they'll take pictures of the night sky and they'll tell somebody to go up and just hold really still and go like this, looking up at the Milky Way. That way, they'll see a really tiny person and a really big Milky Way, okay? That's one example, okay? But that person going like this has to be very far away, because if they're like right up here and they're looking at the Milky Way and they're going like this, they're going to be very blurry. It might as well be, what is that? Is that a tree in front of your image? You know. So okay. So next is exposure length. This is pretty much self-explanatory. This is the amount of light that's collected over time. Okay. So obviously your exposure, whatever your subject matter is going to determine how much light that you need to collect over time. Okay. So it's going to depend on the brightness of the object. Okay. So if you're taking a picture of the moon, you obviously are not going to use the same exposure as you would if you were taking pictures of like starscapes or nightscapes, rather. So it's all going to depend on how bright your object is in the first place. Now, some people, what they'll do, and I'll hijack one of your pictures from Flickr. What they'll do is they'll do long exposures on very bright objects using a wide-angle lens to do some special effects. And Steve did one of those, and I'll show it a little later. So anyway, your exposure settings are only limited by how much the sky moves, and there's something called the 500 rule. I won't get into that now, but that's something you need to keep in mind when you're setting your exposures, okay? You need to make sure that your exposures are long enough to collect that light, okay, and but short enough so that the apparent movement of the sky is not going to smear across your sensor, okay? So that's where you may need to go revisit FStop. That's maybe where you need to go and visit gain, which is the next part. So back to here, obvious reasons. We're going to leave our FStop the same. So our exposure right now is 1/200th of a second. Okay, that's that's relatively fast as long as the object is standing still, including during daytime or terrestrial. That's okay. But during terrestrial, I don't know if you would want to use something that long. But we have our f-stop really high. Okay, so let's increase our exposure. It's always dimming, always going in the wrong direction here. So we can go up to say one. Now this is live view, so it's not going to really show you per se what you'll see at. I'm trying to go up to 1 second here. What you will see in 1 second, but obviously it's really, really bright here. So 1 second is something you wouldn't want to use with your f-stop wide open when you're taking pictures of the moon, unless you're going to do some sort of special effects photo, like I said earlier. Okay, so so this will be good for like taking in dim objects, but obviously you want to use several seconds if you want to take in the light coming from the stars and from the Milky Way or other objects that are in the night sky that you're wanting to get a good look at. So, if you're, say like 1 second, or well, let's pretend this is up to 20 seconds, okay? Let's say 20 seconds, you take your picture and you look at the image and it's like, well, I can see the stars, but not very well. So what do I do, okay? Well, you go back to the first point. You can raise your f-stop, which we're already at max here, so I can't really demonstrate that. That's another way that you can collect your light, collect more light in that narrow space of time that you have, so that your stars don't smear across your camera sensor. Okay, so anyway, so that's what exposure is.
Can,
Let me bring that back up. Yes.
can you actually see? Like it really got bright when you were fooling around with your settings.
Yeah.
Does your camera do that as well? I mean, can you actually see what it's going to look like?
No.
Okay.
What you just saw is it gives a simulated view, and the camera is trying its best to adjust to that. I don't know where it tops off as far as its actual exposure goes. So say like 30 seconds, it'll still show something like that, but obviously 30 seconds wouldn't look like that. 30 seconds would be just completely white,
Right.
you know.
Right.
So yeah, you wouldn't see anything like that. I don't know what the
So you just have to guess and play around with it
exactly.
to start with.
I mean,
Okay.
yeah, but that 500 rule will give you a good starting point, and again, I'll go over that later. So, okay, so exposure length. Okay, next one that influences how much light you're going to catch is ISO or gain. So, unlike aperture and exposure, your ISO or gain can accentuate how physical light hits the camera sensor by boosting its sensitivity. Okay, your ISO setting can help tremendously in keeping your exposure short. So, if you're in a tight bind where even your f-stop is wide open and your exposure length, even that is not going to get that dim object to show up, you can increase your ISO, and that'll help. Okay, so the next thing is that that you need to keep in mind is that when you're boosting your camera sensitivity by raising the ISO, what else do you raise? Noise. Okay, so not only are you collecting signal from the object that you're trying to photograph, you're also collecting noise as well. So, I mean, and noise has been around for years. I mean, even in just regular film exposures, that's what the different, I don't know much about film, so I apologize for anybody that may be offended by that. But yeah, you can get different kinds of film that have different grain values, okay? And that's pretty much the same thing that's going on here with the digital camera. When you look at film exposures that have I guess, a high grain, again, I don't know what I'm talking about here totally, you start to see that graininess on those exposures. Do what?
It's scattered.
It's scattered is what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Thank you. So, yeah, okay, so scattered. So, yeah, you'll start to see all that, what I would call noise on the film exposure. So it's the same thing that's going on, okay? So, but anyway, yeah, just keep in mind that your ISO can be useful, but you don't want to go too overboard with it, because if you do, yeah, you're going to start to see little points of light. There actually aren't stars, they're just noise, okay? Okay, so demo, we go back to that. Okay, so let's say that our exposures are not good enough. Okay, so we have our f-stop wide open. We have, let me go and lower this, and we'll pretend fun. Actually, let me bring my ISO down first. We'll start at 200. That's good. Okay, so I guess we'll go back to like, yeah, so something like that. So you can see that it's auto-adjusting for that. That's what you were talking about earlier as far as the live view goes here. So I'm doing my best to demo this. Okay, so, well, we can only go, let's pretend this is 10 seconds. We can only go up to 10 seconds. Our aperture is wide open, and we're still not able to see our object very well. So what do? We can go and raise our ISO. So let's see, we'll raise it to, lower it, there you go. behave. Yeah, it's just auto adjusting itself. But anyway, so now we can see our object fairly well because we raised the ISO for it. Let's see. But let's see. If we zoom in, okay, we're looking at the center here. You can see all that graininess that's going on here. Okay, so let's raise our exposure. Okay, now let's lower our f-stop, or excuse me, our gain. Oh, there's 3200. I knew it could go up to 6400 on this thing. Okay. Well, the auto is not allowing me to really demonstrate this that well. Okay, well, I did my best. So basically what will happen is that graininess, it won't be there as much. So, yeah, I apologize. Okay, so that's what ISO is. Okay.
And the higher the ISO, the more graininess.
The more graininess it is, but also the more sensitivity your camera gets. So you're not only are you boosting the amount of signal that you're getting from your object that you're trying to photograph, you're also boosting the camera's noise. Okay, like you're using film, the scatter. Okay, if you go with a higher grain. Anyway, so.
Chris, you're also going to your color saturation and that sort of thing. The lower the ISO, the better your color is going to be if you have something that's in color.
Okay, everybody heard that? Good point. Thank you.
Let me ask you something. Now, different level of camera, high end or low end, ISO is different.
Okay, is ISO different between cameras?
Yes.
Okay.
And like the cheap one ISO up to about 6400.
Yes.
But the high end up to 100 and something thousand ISO.
Yeah.
And now, what type is the ISO that you say high? How can we know that which camera?
Is the
You
better.
have,
Okay.
I mean, it's like my camera, I can raise up to 28,000. It still have no noise.
Yeah, yeah.
And it, what kind of range of ISO that you recommend?
Do I recommend?
Yeah, it's
Astrophotography.
For astrophotography, I would go, me personally, my favorite ISO is 800.
800.
My favorite ISO is 800. I mean, because everywhere I looked when I have been getting into this, as far as the DSLR aspect of it, is I saw ISO 800 was the most popular. Now, yes, I did test it at higher ISOs and lower ISOs, but in the end, I guess I got in line and used ISO 800. So,
Thank you.
so
Getting back to your question about high-end versus low-end cameras, so I started off with a Rebel, and now I've got a 5D, so the entry level to the high-end level. And with the Rebel, I would do ISO 800. With the 5D, I can do 3200, but it's pushing it. I do a lot more 1600 with the 5D.
yeah. So, and that basically comes down to mostly it mostly comes down to the type of camera sensor that's in there. Okay. Each camera sensor is going to be different. Okay, like low-end camera sensors are most likely used for other applications, not just purely for the camera that you have bought. Okay, so say like you may have I don't know, like a cheap point and shoot. Let's say like from a cheap point and shoot from the early 2000s. Obviously, it's going to be not as good as a cheap point and shoot these days, but back then, that sensor may have been used in like daytime security cameras or anything like that. It may not have been used in low lighting conditions, so it didn't really need necessarily in that purest sense for that sensor. It didn't need to be used at high ISOs. So when they went to put it into a consumer camera, and a consumer or an owner of one of those cameras, when they raise the ISO, yeah, they're going to see a lot of grain with it because that they're pushing that sensor's specs beyond what it's really designed to do. Okay, so his sensor over there, this is a Rebel, by the way, so that's what he was talking about. This is sort of a good, I'll go ahead and say this is sort of a good entry level DSLR to go with as far as Canons go. Okay, sorry, I don't know about Nikon's what entry level series is for Canon DSLRs, but yeah, his camera sensor is more expensive, and back in the day, there were the best camera sensors were termed charge a couple of devices, which are CCDs. Nowadays, they're CMOS, and the name escapes, or the acronym escapes me right now. But does anybody know that one? Yeah, CMOS, but that's okay. Anyway, so
By the way, one thing that my teacher teach me that we can use up to 1/3 of the high ISO in our camera. That's still less noise or something like that. Thanks.
yeah. So okay, so yeah, it looks like this is going to last quite a while. All right. All right. So okay, moving on. We're done with cameras now. As far as collecting light, but
One more question. You
okay.
say that is wide angle is fit to Astro. What kind of millimeter that you recommend?
what kind of what?
Millimeters. Of
Millimeters I would recommend. Okay, so for a wide field, I wouldn't go beyond 200, but
No. The whole sky.
for the whole sky.
Like
Okay. Yeah, if you want to do the whole sky, you're getting towards 8 millimeters or lower.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the kind of optics you would need for something like that. Steve has something like that right there. Okay, so well, actually, one more point here: raw file format. Okay, so you want your file format to be raw. Okay, what is raw? It's an uncompressed file format that the designers of your cameras put together so that none of your data that's collected from the image that you took is lost, okay, from like compression or whatever, okay. That's pretty much the gist of that. So if your camera has a RAW setting, which I would hope it would, I don't know why it would not, that's what you want to use for analyzing and processing your images. We'll get to what processing is later. Okay, so now we're at the camera. Now we need to know about the camera lenses. Okay, and this is to break it down into 3 parts as well, or last one was 4 parts. Anyway, so know what to look for in a camera lens. Know what settings are unnecessary. Know how usable your lens's focal length is. Okay, that obviously is depending on the application of astrophotography. So what to look for in a lens, okay? Fixed focal lenses are the best, okay? So the stock lens that comes with most cameras, DSLR cameras, unless you got a really expensive one, are not all that great for astrophotography. Now, I have used the stock lens that comes with Canon Rebel, but I used it at 18 millimeters for Star Trek photos. It works perfectly well for that, okay? But I wouldn't really recommend it so much for anything else. Okay, so, and the biggest selling point of camera lenses is the aperture, okay? How wide open can it go? I've seen apertures below 1, and I'm just like, wow, that must be absolute torture trying to get something like that to focus. But yeah, that's the biggest attribute. That's the selling point for a fixed lens. If you're using a zoom lens, you can use a zoom lens, but I would recommend buying a zoom lens that can stay at a fixed aperture or f-stop throughout its zoom. Okay, that gives you more control over your light collection as far as the f-stops go, and most likely that's what it's designed for. It's designed to collect as much light from the highest or the longest focal length that zoom goes to, because it doesn't matter if it's daytime or nighttime. The more you zoom in, the less light you're going to collect. Okay, so try to get one, if you're going to use a zoom lens, get one that has a fixed aperture. Okay, so examples. Okay, well, right here, what I'm using, this is my lowest focal length lens I have here. Again, good solid starting point with wide angle astrophotography is 20 millimeters. This one's 50 right here. Next I have going up from there. Steve, I'll need you also. Actually, it's in here. Okay. I just bought this because it went on sale, so I was so happy. So this is a Canon 85 millimeter f2.8 lens, right? So we're going up, and obviously it looks bigger than that guy, so stabilization is going to be kind of important, and the focal length is getting longer, so we're going to need to manipulate those 3 settings we talked about a little more. And then finally, to me, this is the stopping point that I would recommend for a wide angle. Okay, 200 millimeter. This is Canon f2.8 to 200 millimeter right here. And so, but like I said, 20 millimeters or less are usually more suited for wide-angle astrophotography. And Steve has got a huge collection over there. Take it away.
Right, so I've got, well, up on this camera here is it's a Canon 100 millimeter macro lens, which I use a lot for astrophotography. It's an f2.8, and it works great for focus and everything else. I've used that quite a lot for that kind of thing. I've got here, this is a 10 to 24, which I've used quite a lot. This is a Tamron lens, which is pretty good, and it sticks to its focal length.
Is that a fixed aperture? Also?
What's that?
Is that a fixed f-stop?
Yeah. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
Let's see, what is it? Yeah, I guess it is. I'm not sure what the f-stop is on this one. Okay. Let's see. I can't read it.
6.5.
It's 3.5 to 4.5, something like
Okay,
that.
so it's not fixed.
Okay. Then there's this one. This is an 8 millimeter, which is almost good enough for whole sky, but not quite. Okay, and that's a nice lens. And then this is a 5.8. This will really do the whole sky. Okay, and I have some examples I'll show you later of this kind. This is called Lens Baby. It's called, and this is not fixed. This is 3.5 to 22. Okay, so that's a nice lens for doing just aiming straight up and doing the entire sky. And I have like examples of that. Then there's my f200, which is similar to the 100, but that's also, if I want to get really close up and do a mosaic of the sky or something like that, of a galaxy or something like that, then I might use that. But I've found that generally, and I've got lots of other kinds of lenses that do various things, fixed and not fixed. And basically you just figure out what you're going to shoot and what's the best lens for shooting that. And because I've got a lot of lenses, I can kind of pick which one I want. But I found for fun on a DSLR, all sky lenses are a lot of fun. And I'll show an example. Well, I'll show it to you now. This one is one of the first ones I did. This was with 14 millimeter. This is a mosaic of about 12 images of the Milky Way across the sky. And this was done just with a Canon camera on a tripod with a 14 millimeter lens. And I just aimed it at the horizon, took a picture, moved it up, took another picture with some overlap, and just kept doing that all across the sky until I had about 12 shots all across the sky. And then we put them together in Photoshop. So this was done, when I was just beginning, and I happened to be in a place with a dark sky up in Virginia. And so this is the kind of thing you can do with a camera if you choose to. And I knew almost nothing about shooting the sky at this point, but it came out much better than I thought it would. And so I had it printed out.
What time of year was that?
This was October, I think.
October, okay.
Yeah, one of the first star parties up at Stanton River, back in, I guess, 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, something like that. And all I had was a camera and then some lenses on a tripod. And so I just aimed it at the sky and just took some pictures to see what exposure I would need to get something to show up and not streak. And then once I got that, I just took a bunch of pictures across the sky and then played around with it in Photoshop for a while. Yeah.
Your picture is stand up, right? Right here, right?
Well, you can do it this way.
Which one?
Horizon to horizon.
It's horizon to horizon. This is southern horizon to the northern horizon.
Oh, I think that is on the right-hand side,
Yeah,
that is
so-
on the tree and
Yeah, go ahead.
So, this is what you're seeing.
Yeah, like that.
oh, you
So
took
that's
Right.
around,
north
oh,
and
okay.
south,
Exactly.
okay.
Oh,
Right.
thank you.
Right, and it just so happens, this is a meteor that just happened to be there when I took that particular picture.
Beautiful.
Pure luck.
Beautiful.
Okay, and the Andromeda Galaxy is somewhere here, I can't see it from up. Somewhere up in here, or one of these places, is the Andromeda Galaxy. It's just showed up as well a little bit in there. So, I mean, you don't need a lot more than just a camera on a tripod.
How long of an exposure is
This
that?
is, each one was probably, let's see, 45 seconds, something like that.
How did you get them to line up when you? photoshopped it?
Experimentation. Pure experimentation.
Sometimes hours.
and a lot of hours playing around in Photoshop and adjusting the distortion and that sort of thing to get the stars to match up. Okay, but I took enough pictures that there wasn't terribly off, you know, and so it was, you were able to sort of manipulate it around. Say, two photos put together and then just manipulate them in Photoshop so the stars in one would match the stars in the other, and just kept going like that. Okay, and there was a little cropping because right at the edges it was a little off, you know, that kind of thing. But it was wide enough that I got the whole galaxy in to the picture. So this is the prime image I use to show people that you don't need any more than a camera and a tripod to do something interesting. And a lot of patience, of course. And a dark side in this case, where you could actually see the Milky Way, so you knew what you were doing.
That had to be a rural area, right?
Oh yeah, it's in a park in southern Virginia. It's a dark sky site now, so it's quite dark there. You can, with your eyes, see the Milky Way. And if you have good eyes, you can see Andromeda a little bit. You can see a lot of things that you can't see in the city. Wouldn't even know it's there. But it's you know, this kind of thing requires a dark side. But I've got other pictures that are more local that also show things, which I'll show you later.
Thank you, sir.
But that's, like I said, that's a 14mm lens, and it's not an expensive lens. It's just a Tamron lens.
Is that a Rokinon?
What's that?
Is that a Rokinon?
Rokinon probably, or Tamron, one of those. I can't remember which one it was now. I have several lenses that go to that range. So, and it wasn't a fixed lens at that point, it was just a zoom lens. Okay, that's good.
Thank you, sir.
So you went against my advice. The zoom lens that does not have a fixed f-stop, you know, doesn't matter. So, okay, oh well. Anyway, so know what lens settings are unnecessary. So image stabilization, I mean, what's the point? You're on a tripod, right? So turn auto-focusing off, because you are the one that are gonna have to manually focus, because most cameras, at least the ones I've run across, cannot focus on a star, per se, okay? What really does help though is if you have live view, like this one, the T3i. T3i is kind of on the old side now. Actually, golly, it's probably almost 10 years old now. Yeah, the T3i, what's nice about it is it has a live screen on it, so I'm able to use a digital zoom that's built into the sensor to look at stars, and I can just adjust the focus manually. But you do not want to use autofocus, because yeah, your camera's never going to get it right.
I'll just say that picture I took with the moon, though, that was autofocus, and that was better than anything I could do with a manual focus. But the moon's a big object.
Yeah, the moon's a big object, and plus it's much brighter too.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good point. But so yeah, there are instances where autofocus will come in handy. So, and the moon's a good example. So know how usable your lens's focal length is. Simply, the longer your focal length, the more the sky's movement will be apparent, and the shorter your exposures will have to be. Okay. So it's like I said, 200mm, you don't want to go bigger. Okay, longer focal lengths are limited to few brighter objects, like he just said, the moon or a solar eclipse, for example. Like, what focal length was that with?
That was 300mm.
Yeah, so 300mm. Okay, so that was good. But again, going back, the bulk of the images you'll see here are taken at 20mm or less. So finally, camera accessories. Okay, the lens hood, okay? So just like during the day, a lens hood, this is the one, tiny one for, tiny cheap one for my 85mm here. And then down here, back to my 200mm, here's this guy, okay? So, yeah, so just like during the day, it can help keep away stray light from, say, like maybe a headlight or a really bright laptop that may be close by, because we tend to use a lot of laptops in the field when we're doing astrophotography around other people who may be using a telescope, where just a simple tripod, it's not going to be just a simple tripod and a camera, and you can do everything by eye. If you can, you're old school, and yeah, ovation for you. So, but anyway, one of the nice side effects of having a lens hood is not necessarily for what it was used for in the first place, is that here in North Carolina, we all know, go out in the morning, like during the spring or fall or during the summer, not so much during the winter, you get frost in, your car is soaked, unless you're in the garage, but yeah, your car is soaked. So you have lens fogging problems here in very humid areas, okay? So especially here in North Carolina, almost always dew is going to be a problem. There are ways around that, as far as like using electricity to keep your cameras warm with basically it's a wrap of a bunch of resistors in series that you wrap around your camera, and you just keep it a tad warmer than ambient temperature. But once again, that's another thing that you have to bring out. I tend to be a minimalist, and with that in mind, minimalist when it comes to dew. Now this won't work with all focal lengths. I bought another one. Just took a milling tube and made a longer. If I can get it on here, it does work. Trust me. Go like that. So this buys me probably about almost 2 more hours worth of telescope time or imaging time when I'm out imaging. Okay, it takes a lot longer for this to cool down and for the condensation to finally get down there. Okay, actually I've gone well over 2 hours with this, but that's just a number I'm just going to throw out there. It'll keep it dry for hours. We'll just say it like that. Okay. So, but one thing to keep in mind with this, this obviously will not work at lower focal lengths. Why? Because pretty much if you're like doing like a fisheye all sky camera view, well, you're sort of like pulling in absolutely everything around you, and you're going to pull in also everything inside here. Okay, so you're not going to get the whole entire sky in that image with a shorter focal length lens. And so in that case, lens hoods on very short focal length lenses just won't work. They just won't work. So you can go back to doing what I was talking about. You can use one of those electrically heated resistor strips. We call them dew strips. Or what you can also do is you can wrap 2 hand warmers on either side of your lens, and that'll help a little bit. That's not foolproof. The electrical one I was talking about works totally. Works 100%. Okay. Now, what I talk about here, a lens hood can be fitted with other accessories, not just with a mailing tube, but the other one of the other photo ops that we talked about that you can do with a tripod and a camera is taking pictures of solar eclipses, right? So again, you're taking a picture of the sun. You do not want to melt your camera or your eyeball while you're focusing. So I got this guy. This is made by Bader or Bader, B-A-A-D-E-R. It's a type of solar film that basically it's almost its own f-stop. It basically lets through 1/10,000th of the sun's brightness to come in and hit your camera sensor. So it dims it down considerably, and because of that, you can look through your camera and you can start focusing on the sun. Then when totality comes around, you can just remove your lens hood and you're ready. Okay. When totality stops, get that thing on there quick. Now, one thing you see how I'm struggling with this. The other thing you can do is get it into focus, and then stand in front of it. Take the lens cap off and just like throw a sheet over it. Okay, and hopefully your lens will stay focused during the whole time while you're waiting for totality. When totality comes around, take off that drape, start shooting images. Okay, but I actually use this lens and an adapter I have. I think I have it down here. This is off subject a little bit. I have an adapter back here for the bayonet mount, and I'm actually able to use it as a telescope onto itself. So I actually use this to like look at the sun as well. I mean, I'm really into solar photography. When I put my whole photography and visual setup together, I have 3 telescopes sitting on top of my motorized tripod. So that gives you an idea of how obsessed I am with the sun. Of course, these days the sun is kind of boring because we're at a solar minimum right now. Not much in the way of sunspots or prominences and flares.
Can I comment on solar again? There's the other option is a very, very dark neutral density filter.
Okay, right, yeah, that's a good point, yeah. Does a polarizing filter work, like 2 of them together?
What's that?
Would a polarizing filter work, like 2 of them together?
I don't know, I've never tried that. I know my super, the one I used for the solar eclipse.
Is that what you used?
That's a neutral density.
That's what we were using that time? Okay, all right. I didn't notice that. Okay. So anyway, yeah, it can be fitted with other things. I already showed you examples. The intervalometer, okay, so obviously long exposure shots are going to need to be kept, your camera's going to need to be kept still. It's got to be on a nice rock solid tripod that's not going to shake. You need to make sure, most people in here I'm sure are smart enough not to set up a tripod on concrete or like on a wood deck or anything. Yeah, so it's something like that. Here, I'll pass mine around. So, this is what it looks like. So, on that thing, what you can do is you can set the delay of when you're ready to take pictures. So, let's say you got your subject framed really nicely, and you're ready to start shooting. Well, when you press the button, there's still going to be that residual shaking from when you initially touch the button, right? So what that allows you to do is you can set a delay on it. The other thing it lets you do is it'll also allow you to set the exposure time for it, because most cameras that we can, or most DSLRs that we would use in the field, sometimes we go beyond, at least in my example, at least in my case with the Rebel T3i, the longest exposure it can go up to is 30 seconds. After that, beyond 30 seconds, the camera has what's called a bulb setting, which means that I have to manually set the, manually or electronically set the exposure I want. Now, what I could do with bulb is I could just sit here and on the bulb setting and just hold down the shutter button. Just hold it down beyond 30 seconds, and then when I'm done, release. Well, once again, we're trying to keep this thing still. So, you know, if I'm shaking at all or I like turn and look at something, I'm going to probably end up shaking the camera. The intervalometer can allow you to also set the exposure. So if I want to set it for beyond 30 seconds all the way up to infinity, that intervalometer will allow me to do it. Secondly, or thirdly, what that intervalometer will also do is you can set it to take a number of exposures. So say like, okay, I got the delay started so that when I walk away, I don't have to worry about residual shaking. I know I want my exposure to be 1 minute, and now, I want to take 100 of these. You can set it on the intervalometer, get it started, walk away, and you're all set. Okay, you don't have to worry about shaking or anything, just as long as, you know, nothing gets in the way. Hopefully you'll get a meteor in the way, that's nice, and then hopefully you will not get an airplane in the way of your shot. So anyway, I've already passed that around.
Cable though, right? So you need to be careful with that one when you
Well,
leave.
it's connected to the cable, but they do make ones that are, you know, wireless.
Yeah,
I looked into
because you don't want to
that.
shake the camera with that, right? Like when you set it down or anything.
Oh, well, no, I mean, typically you'll just start it up and then the first few shots, maybe if it's really, you know, you throw away.
So yeah, so one thing you want to do you mind?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so one thing that I would recommend doing is taking your wire, going to your intervalometer and like loop it around something on your tripod. That way, you have slack right here, okay? And so say like the wind comes by and blows your intervalometer around, it's not going to shake your camera that much, just as long as you have enough slack right here to prevent the wind transmitting or oscillating up the wire here and shaking your camera. So you can do that. We do that all the time when we have our big telescope rigs out, because we have lots of wires coming off of them for various accessories and everything.
And Chris, unlike other pieces of astrophotography equipment, for value for your dollar, intervalometers aren't all that expensive. So they start about $20 for one like that, and they can go up to about $80. But for what you can improve your photos with one of those, it's one of the cheaper additions you can make to your setup.
Yeah, it's pretty invaluable. I would say so. If there's any, if there's any accessory, I would definitely go with that. Unless you're going around taking solar eclipses, I would definitely get a solar filter first. But okay, anyway, so I'm not going to really talk about this too much. Aftermarket camera modifications. You can do onboard firmware modifications to enhance your camera's ability, or give your cameras more options to that are not provided by the manufacturer's software on that camera. What you can do is, there's the one that comes immediately to mind, from what I understand from Joe Ped, there's others, but Magic Lantern software works, I don't know if they do it for Nikon yet or not, but they do have it for Canon, and I think they have it for all Canon cameras, not just a Rebel. And what it does is it loads up an operating system over your the manufacturer's operating system. Like the one I have in here, I have both on there. I have the manufacturer's operating system on it, and I have the Magic Lantern operating system on it. So one example of that is that, you know, handing around the intervalometer right there is the Magic Lantern software that I have loaded on here. I haven't really messed with it that much because, you know, I use the intervalometer. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You can set up something I just described that you would have on your intervalometer. You can set up a delay. You can set up how long you want all your exposures to be. You can set up a bracketed series of exposures. You can also set up the number of exposures you want. So it's very useful. But again, you're putting software onto the camera itself, which was never meant to be. The only thing that was meant to be on your software is the manufacturer's operating system and whatever updates you know, they provide for the camera. Yes.
One thing that be careful, because of Canon USA will not warranty after you put the extra software.
Yeah, thank you. That's something I completely forgot
no way,
about.
because of you can kill the camera.
You can brick it per se, is what the
Yes, and
term
they're
is.
not repair for you, and they're not warranty.
That's
Now,
right.
one more question. For astrophotography, that I never shoot before, okay? I just try after learn from you. You have two kind of camera. One is small sensor or one full frame sensor. Which one you like?
Which one do I like? I just like the, was it the APS sensor? Is that what's
Yeah.
called? APS? I like the APS sensor, and mainly because they're the most economical.
Okay.
I've seen what full frame can do. The problem with full frame cameras, as far as astrophotography goes, is that if you're using cheap lenses, or depending on how you're using your lens, because the sensor is so big, you're going to start to see some abnormalities in your images, especially when you're doing astrophotography at the very edges of the frame. Okay, I even see it in these right here in APS sensor sizes. So it's all up to you. Full frame is really nice because, well, you cover more of the sky without at the expense of buying a different lens so that you can get that much of the sky. Resolution's obviously going to be a lot larger, but me, APS is good enough. Okay, and again, for me, it's mainly because it's economical. Because full frame, I just don't.
Right, I
don't
have,
actually have one.
this is a APS-C or whatever it is, so 60D. Okay, there's a 6D in there, which is full frame, which is good for some things. It really all depends on what part of the sky and how much of the sky you want to shoot. Okay, and so that's, you know, really, if you have multiple cameras, you can afford to have multiple cameras, then having a full frame is really nice. But if you're putting these like 8mm lenses and things like that on it, I find the 60D just works a lot better for full sky than the 6D does. But so you just have to kind of try. If you have multiple cameras, try and see what you're doing.
And one more question. Canon and Nikon just have a full frame mirrorless.
Mirrorless? Oh, okay.
Yeah, because of mirror like this, when you shoot it, it flips and vibration. And mirrorless is quiet and no vibration.
Yeah. So yeah, back in the day, the only thing that we could a way around that was called mirror lock. I think is what it was called. I never really did look into that, but Magic. I don't know if that's built into the Rebel, but Magic Lantern has that in there as far as mirror lock
All
goes.
Canon have mirror lock system.
Oh, they do. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Shows you know more about my camera than I do.
But if you have a choice, you don't want the mirror hit anyway, right? If you have.
Yeah, because he's right there. Because whenever you know, we talked about setting up the intervalometer. If I set up the intervalometer and I walk away, it's not going to just flip up and then turn on. No, it's going to flip up and turn on immediately after it. Okay, so residual shake will still be there. I haven't really seen much in the way of problems with that, but But it's a good point that that you should keep in mind. If you have some sort of unexplained vibration, that may be it. The mirror may be just shaking your camera too much at the beginning of the exposure.
I think if you're in live view mode as well, then the mirror's already open, it's gonna stay there, right? So
That's true, yeah.
That's how I got mine, that it was in the live view.
Okay, so yeah, so if you want to turn on, yeah, that's a good trick. I didn't know that right there. Yeah, so let me see if I'm following you. So if you turn on live view and then start your exposure, well, the mirror's already up, and so there should be no shaking from the mirror, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so there you go.
The thing that live view, and I mean is if the bright light, not in the sky, dark sky, right? The bright light, and the light can come to the live view,
Mhm.
and
I see. I know what you're saying. Yeah. So you had a question?
Yeah, so the maximum reach of does it boot from the memory card? That's what my understanding was.
Okay, you want me to come over there? I have bad hearing.
No,
The software boots from memory card, and the answer is yes.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
so you are not technically modifying the camera software as such. Once you remove the memory card, you are off from that software.
That is an option. I don't have. With Magic Lantern, that is an option. You can just put it onto your camera. It is already on there with it, and I can swap out memory cards all day. And so far, I hadn't experienced any problems with it. So, yeah, I'm being a little brave. So,
Yeah, I have tried it once, so that's what I did. I removed the memory card and tried the other one.
and it works very well. Okay, yeah, there you go. There's a good precaution right there.
And one more thing to add was just to if someone doesn't have an intervalometer, we can set the self timer of 10 seconds to out.
To avoid the vibration.
I didn't hear that one.
Just set the self timer of 10 seconds for clicking instead of
In
about
some
10.
cameras, you can tell, you can press the button and it waits 2 seconds or 10 seconds or something.
Oh, it
That's what
flips the
vibration
mirror
can
up during
say,
that
yeah.
time?
But it keeps you from getting camera shake if you're using the shutter.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I've done that before. Okay. All right, so altering your camera sensor. Now, yeah, I did that, so yeah, the warranty is voided now on this one right up here. So one of the, some of the wavelengths that nebulosity or emission nebula give off is one of the most important ones. It's called hydrogen alpha. I'm not going to get into what exactly hydrogen alpha is, but the sensitivity of your camera, if it can pick up hydrogen alpha really well, then it's going to make your deep space or deep sky photos more impactful, okay? Because what happened is when you removed the IR rejection filter that's in here, you're letting in all the wavelengths of light that are out there to hit the sensor, including the infrared, which is what that filter was trying to keep out in the first place. So there's some people, I don't know, one of the people that I went to modify this to remove the infrared filter, I don't think he's doing it anymore. Gary Honus?
Yeah, he stopped. Yeah.
He stopped doing it. So there's a guy down in South Carolina that did this, and he would remove the IR filter, and he had the choice of putting just clear optical glass on top of it, which would allow all light to come in, or he could put a milder IR filter over it, which would let in those wavelengths of light that come from emission nebulae, but still reject some of the infrared, okay? It doesn't get rid of all the infrared, and because of that, whenever I have to use this camera anywhere else, say like in here, the white balance is just going to be off. I have to set up a custom white balance for my camera. Almost all DSLRs have this option where you can set up a custom white balance. So like here, live view mode, if I were to, let's see. Okay, so this is my custom white balance for in here. Obviously, it's pretty off. It's not perfect, okay? And my custom white balance is set for taking pictures of the night sky, okay? So what I did is I went out, and how did I set that? If the night sky is dark, you know, and you don't have anything white to really image. You use something astronomical that gives off light. What gives off light that's also astronomical? The sun, okay? So you go out during the day, you get just a white sheet of paper, or if you're a purist, you can use a white card or gray card if you wish that photographers use. You take a picture of that and you tell the camera that this is what white looks like, okay? And then when you go to use your camera at night, it'll pick up those wavelengths, different wavelengths of light coming from the stars, coming from the emission nebula. Stars look so much more colorful with that filter modification put into it. Emission nebula show up a lot better, so you get all these red clouds that will show up in some of your images. They're still tiny because, again, this is wide field. It's not long focal length imaging. So like right there, that's my custom white balance. I don't know. Let's do auto white balance. Let's see. Well, that's not too bad. I mean, but there is a little bit of red there. Okay. So, yeah, it's never going to be perfect. So, I don't know. We're not really under incandescent. Yes, my battery is low. Okay.
My Nikon came without a filter in it.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, so it depends on the auto white balance for regular photography.
Okay. All right. So, actually, you have one too, don't you?
What's that? Right here.
Yeah.
This is a Canon T2i that Gary Holmes modified that took everything out.
Mhm.
Okay, and so if I want to use, and what I do with this is I have these filters. One's just basically a light filter, a light pollution filter. Another one is a hydrogen alpha filter. So I can plug these filters into these here clip-in filters, they'll call them. And I can plug those into this camera, and I can do hydrogen alpha imaging with the DSLR. And it works nicely. It's just without a telescope, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of thing you can do with this. I don't use this for anything else but that. Okay, I mean, I've tried infrared things and stuff like that with it, and it's interesting. But mostly it's with clip-in filters, especially if I want to just have it on a tripod when I'm traveling or something. So that's the kind of thing you can do with this sort of thing. It's not cheap to get one of these. This was a used T2i that I bought from Southwestern Camera and sent it to Gary, and he modified it, but it cost more to get it modified than it did to buy the camera. So,
and you'd be surprised. I mean, he put a YouTube video. I think that was his YouTube video
yeah.
of how to disassemble it, remove the filter, and put another filter over the sensor. My God, it's involved. It is incredible how he was able to pull this off so many times.
Also, these are the hydrogen alpha. This hydrogen alpha filter is probably $300. Okay, so this costs more than the camera as well. So it just kind of depends on what your priority.
So you can find them on cloudy nights a lot because people upgrade to cooled Astrophotos.
Then there's that.
You can buy them for like $300, T3i with modification.
Mm-hmm.
I did that and it's great. You just want to be careful of the shutter count. Because some of them have like they're used like years and years and years, and the shutter starts to degrade.
Yeah.
But it's nice. It's $300. Nice. One stuff.
One more question. When you shoot the sky picture, the star picture, all my lens, I put UV filter, protect not the dust or something coating. I have to take the UV
Yes,
filter
take it off. No filters
No
whatsoever.
filter.
No filters.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Also, one thing for long nighttime exposures, might put tape or an eyepiece cover over the back of the camera because it can let light in.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's actually happened to me once, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I was far away from the light source. The light source was a campfire, and I was like, "What is going on here?" And then I was like, "Oh yeah!" And so it's like after an hour trying to figure it out, I covered it up, and sure enough, that was the problem. It was it was coming in through here. I mean, just coming in through there. It was just enough light to bounce off and go into and hit the sensor, and just it's like I thought it would be so much better than this.
All Canon, they give you the eyepiece cover.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Except
too.
you throw it away.
You throw. Oh, really?
Right.
I don't remember seeing that. Well, it's okay. All right. Well, anyway, so okay, so all of the examples that we were talking about at the very, very beginning, what you can do with camera plus tripod. Okay. So star trail images. These are really easy to do. You don't necessarily need to be somewhere very dark, but if you're in some place that's very bright, you want to try to avoid like light hitting the lens itself. So if you can, try to find some way to keep the light from hitting the lens, because again, if you use a lens hood, there's a chance the lens hood will start to get in the way of your picture, because again, these are sort of wide field view, wide field views of the night sky. So yeah, try to find some way to keep light from hitting the lens. What I do over at my in-laws place, because they have some nice wide open areas, is that they have a lot of outdoor lighting, and they ask, well, do you want us to turn it off? And I was like, no, you're my in-laws, I'm not gonna make you work hard, so that's what, you know, so anyway, what I would do there is kind of funny. I would take a step ladder and put like a trash bag over the top of it and angle it just right so that the outdoor lighting is not hitting my telescope. I never did it with the camera lens, but yeah. There's some places where you'll have like a photogenic foreground object against the night sky, not just for star trails, but other things too, I guess. But you want to keep the any direct lighting from hitting the sensor, and because if you don't, it's kind of like the campfire thing that we were talking about. It's just going to ruin the shot. So star trails, the sky moves or the Earth moves and makes the sky look like it's moving, and the whole point is to get trailing of the stars, which we try to avoid in almost all other aspects of astrophotography. But we're just trying to show the very nice natural effect of how the Earth moves. Okay, so but it takes a while to actually notice this. Okay, so you don't need to follow the mentality that if I want to see this for 30 minutes, see a 30-minute star trail photo, take a 30-minute star trail photo, I need to leave my shutter open for 30 minutes. No, you don't have to. Okay. If you do, you may start to capture other things like other ambient light that may come through. You may capture more than one airplane that will come through and ruin the shot, or some people actually like that. You know, I think it's kind of neat too. But anyway, what you could do is you could take single long exposures, like 30 seconds for, like in this example, or the example I showed at the very beginning with the strawberry shed. 30 seconds for 30 minutes. So I take a 30-second exposure, delay it by 5 seconds, start on the middle one, delay it, start on the middle one, start on the middle one, start on the middle one. Okay. So you can do that over and over and over again, and then you can assemble it in computer software like Photoshop, and I think StarStax is free. StarStax will actually specializes in that, where you can load all of your your shorter exposures to show what the star trails look like if you had opened the shutter for 30 minutes, okay? And so that can assemble it for you, and but if you already have Photoshop, there's...
Is that a PC software?
StarStax? I'm not sure. You have your iPad there, look it up for me.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I don't know. Okay. Well, yeah, Photoshop is, but Photoshop, I'll go ahead and say Photoshop is something that we use a lot in astrophotography. But again, the default goes to 20 millimeters or less. Okay, so examples, all right. So here's stellarium. Okay, and basically this is right now. I don't know where. Okay, yeah, this is set for our coordinates right now here at the library, but not that matters so much. So we go north. Okay, so this is fisheyed a little bit, which is nice. So I'm just fast forwarding the time. This is stellarium. I highly recommend this if you don't already know about it. It's a nice planetarium software that shows you how the night sky works, and it's very customizable. It's free, and so there you go. So if we do this for 30 minutes, you can see the little satellites coming by. You can see how the star trails work at the pole. Now, if you come over here, you can see that the star trails aren't as circular, they're arced. Whereas if you come to somewhere completely like, well, here we go, south, it's circular again. But the further you get to like the west or the east, the more horizontal they become. Now, if you're at the equator, you're in the prime area where everything's going to be vertical if you look west or east, but you're not going to be able to see a full circular star trail because, well, the North Star is at the horizon, and then the polar south is also at the horizon, so you're not going to really see any nice circular what do you call it, star trips.
How many 100 pictures that you take?
How many pictures?
100 pictures?
So 30 seconds for
Uh-huh.
30 minutes.
Good.
Okay, so that's 60 pictures. Okay, so yeah, it's a lot. Okay, but I mean, you don't necessarily have to do RAW for that because I mean it's just very, simple photography. I still recommend RAW though. Okay, RAW camera formats. If you want to do it in JPEG, that's fine. It's up to you. Because I mean, with star trail photos, you're not going to do very much in the way of post processing, and we'll get into what processing is later. So
One more question.
yeah.
When you take about 60 photos like this,
Mhm.
which I think about question. I have a 16 million pixel camera
Mhm.
up to about 51.5 million pixel camera,
Mhm.
and if it take 60 photo of 51.5 million pixel, there that be a lot for my computer.
Yeah. So
And and which one do you recommend, 16 or 24 million pixel or 30 million pixel?
So I've done star trail photos or attempted star trail photos with an 8mm or not 8mm, excuse me, an 8 megapixel camera. So by today's standards, any camera can handle that many photos that are that size. Okay, this is 16 megapixels, so it's bigger. Just this simple cheap laptop can handle that. Okay, so to answer your question. Go with a camera that doesn't have that many megapixels, or most RAW file formats you cannot customize for the amount of megapixels. You can't downsample or whatever the image is and still keep it in RAW. So again, for these kinds of images, you don't have to necessarily do it in RAW format. I'm sort of against it, but you're not going to do much post-processing with it. And again, we'll talk about post-processing later. So this is 30 seconds right here, okay? And
Only
if you
30
zoom in,
seconds, really?
to what?
That's only 30 seconds?
Or 30 seconds, no, it's not.
30 minutes.
30-second exposures,
Or
30 minutes, yeah, thank you.
And is it
Thank you
just
for calling me out there.
Is it just dump up in the barn at night with the polar axis?
No, I did that. Yeah, I'm just like, let's just put something fun there, and so that's where I went. So each exposure, which you're going to see here, because I put a delay between them, like I said, 5-second delay. And I did that so I can go back and visit it, make sure everything's behaving, making sure the wind didn't do something or whatever. But that's one of the things that's important about this. You need to make sure your camera stays still the whole time. Okay, you can't have any errors or anything like that, because if you do, your star trails are going to look nice and uneven, or they're going to look warped. Although some people like the way star trails can look warped, and Joe Pettit has a good example in here for that we'll get to. But because I put a 5-second delay in here, they're not, if you look carefully, you can kind of tell they're not straight arcs, okay? So we zoom in here, you can see the individual 30-second photos that I took, and something happened right here. Something happened right here, and you can see it better right there in that one. But anyway, yeah, so you can see it's just a bunch of little ticks.
Is this with the intervalometer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the intervalometer, yeah. So that's my best one. I need to get back into it and do some more. But Joe Pettit, Hydraulic Astronomy Club, is like the king of star trails. So this is something he did. Now, when I was talking about the warping effect here, I can't remember where this was. It's somewhere out in the southwest, if I remember correctly. I think it's actually Colorado.
Looks like FStop.
Do what?
It looks like FStop, but I don't know.
So you're looking at this, and again, he did, let's see, 90 frames, maybe 51. Okay, he didn't put 32 seconds. Okay, so he did 32-second exposures with this. Obviously, if he had done something longer than 32 seconds, all those light sources from the city skyline there would have blown out the picture kind of badly. But looks like I can't tell if that's a meteor or a airplane down there. But one of the things you'll notice in here, when I was talking about optical problems with leaving your lens wide open at say like at f1.4 with this guy, you start to expose the optical limits of your lenses, okay? So here, had he put the, I'll go ahead and tell you what's going on here, the reason why it looks warped. Had he put the sensor here and framed it right in the middle of the sensor, in the middle of the photo here, one downside is he would not have caught the skyline if you had moved it down there, so you probably would see that there's light pollution there. It's like, oh, that looks ugly, there's light pollution there. But he put the skyline in there, so that's a nice effect. So instead, he moved it up to the corner. Okay, and what happens is that the optical effects, or the optical, I hesitate to say imperfections of the lens, start to become more apparent in astrophotography the further you get from the corners, okay? Like sometimes I'm watching a movie and I can see I can see where a lens is vignetted, where sometimes the cinematographer will do that deliberately, or because they're having to adjust an f-stop, I'll see that the edges of the movie I'm watching, the images of the edges are a little fuzzy. And that's why that's happening right there, is that the light isn't coming in exactly square with the sensor. It's coming in a little bit at an angle and curving a little bit, okay? So, had he put this thing, because everything would be circular, in the middle, you wouldn't see that, okay? This is a problem when we're doing long exposure photography as well. When we're doing long exposure photography with like telescopes and stuff, if we're using a fast f-stop, say like f4 or sometimes f5, you will see on the corners of the image stars that are radiating out from the center. And if it's really bad, it looks like you're traveling at light speed on Star Trek. So anyway, that's why it's warped there. Now, yet again, here's Joe Pettit. This is actually over at Jordan Lake. And so one of the things I like about, let's see, is it on the other one? Yeah, you can see it better there. But one of the things I like about this is, again, the skyline there, and also you get to see exactly what's going on as far as the airplanes, okay? So the airplanes are actually taking off and landing over here. That's already you, okay? So that's where that's coming from. And that's why they're all, radiating from there. And I don't see any meteors in this, okay? So obviously, Polaris is up here somewhere. And if you come down here, you can start to see that we have straight lines right here. And then as you go over here, they're starting to arc again towards the south. You can kind of also see how this is a little fisheye because some of the trees are leaning towards the center of the picture here over here. So, but that's one of the caveats of this. Now here's a really, psychedelic star trail image right here. And this kind of exemplifies a little better that you see that there are two poles going on here. You have Polaris down here, and then you have the south celestial pole, which is below the horizon down here. But you can start to see the circular effects of the stars rotating around the celestial south. So anyway, there's his details below. He did this at ISO 6400.
Chris, one of the other things I can say that you can do when you do this kind of thing is make time lapses instead of star trails, so you can see the things in the sky moving as you go across, and that's kind of nice as well. So there's several things you can do when you do this kind of collection of data. Is make multiple different ways of looking at that data. So
Joe Pettit did something like that, and I could not find that video that saved my life. What he did is he took the exposures and he did a time lapse, and he showed the swirls forming, and then before that he showed the actual stars just moving independently. To me, the swirls look cooler. So, but anyway, and then you could also see off in the distance the light pollution going down because it's becoming nighttime, so people are not using as much lighting. There was like some sort of city or town way far away.
And another thing you can do is you can take these things, and then you can take a single shot of the background or of the city or the mountains or something, and superimpose that into your thing, so you can decrease the exposure or change the exposure for the thing that's on the ground. So there are a lot of Photoshop tricks you can do to make really nice images.
One more question, sir.
Yes.
Why this picture is one circle in this corner and another circle for this corner?
Why is it like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
What made it
So,
like that?
Okay, so again, it's sort of like his picture that he had here. So you remember this, okay? So remember how I said that this is oriented like
Yeah.
this, okay? We'll say that this is south and this is north, okay? So that's what's going on here, all right? This is north and this is south, okay? Now, I'm showing trees here, so that doesn't really, I don't know if that really helps, but what's going on is that down here is the celestial South Pole. So if you were to go to like South America and do this, you would point it towards the south. Why? Because this the north celestial pole where we have Polaris, the North Star, would be down here. Okay, so if you want circular star trails and you're in South America, you would point it down here. So down here, if the Earth was gone, you could see the circular effect going on down here. But as you come across, okay, you get to the other pole and you start to see the circular effect over there, okay? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I wish I know this one because of 6 months ago I go to South America.
Oh, really? Yeah.
South Pole.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about that, you know, some of the things that we see here in the northern sky, I mean, not doing this kind of stuff, but just objects that you can observe through a telescope or take pictures through a telescope. There's some really spectacular stuff down in the south, and the southern hemisphere is not as populated as the northern hemisphere, so yeah, we missed a lot of things.
At that minute, you say that all the bottom of this one here, the artist cut and paste in this picture, right? It's not the same picture of the star trail.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't follow that, sorry.
Go back to that. Yeah, that means that if there is South Pole, this North Pole, that means this one someone have to use Photoshop to bring another what you call the horizontal line to there and pass through this.
If you want to photo, are you talking about photoshopping too?
Yeah.
This was one scene, right?
Yeah, this is one scene.
This is one scene, no tricks here, right?
No tricks here.
Wide angles.
Landscape is no Photoshop.
Wide angle shot.
It's not Photoshop.
Chris, the focus point in the south is the Southern Cross.
Yes, yeah.
Crux.
Yeah.
Yeah, it points to the.
Yeah, it's sort of the equivalent of Cassiopeia here, okay? So, I mean, if you were further north, you would see like say like in Canada, like northern Canada, you would see Cassiopeia almost all year, okay? Whereas down in the south, like you're talking about, go further south you go, you'll see the Southern Cross. I saw the Southern Cross once, and this was when I was in southern India. And I was lucky I was there at the right time of year to see it. But yeah, the Southern Cross is the one of the most noticeable, I guess, asterisms. I guess it's, I don't know if it's a named constellation or not. But anyway, okay, so moving on, the next photo op is solar eclipse. Again, use a solar filter because you have to focus on the sun before actually totality begins. Otherwise, you only have but a few minutes to capture totality, which is one of the most spectacular things I've ever seen. Steve and I, we went to a place in Tennessee to capture the 2017 eclipse, and it was really amazing. It's like when we're coming up the last minute to few seconds right before totality starts, I'm like, really? This is how dark it's going to get? And then all of a sudden, right at the countdown, he had a little app on his phone that he bought for $1. Whoever did that app is probably a millionaire now. So on his phone, that was counting down when you can remove your solar filter or to drape off your camera lens to start taking pictures, or using your eyeballs to go and look up at the sun. And right when it hit about between 2 to 0 seconds, it was like somebody took a dimmer switch and turned it down. I was like, wow, this is amazing. Okay, that's my story. I just thought it was, I'll never forget it. But anyway, you can take just single exposure, but if you take bracketed exposures and put them in a software program like Photoshop, taking all those exposures, you can combine them into an HDR image, or you can use some other processing ways to process the different exposures together to make the corona show up. And of course, foregrounds can add to the impact of the images. So for the 2017 eclipse, this is a single exposure right here that I took from my bracketed set. Okay, again, this is 600 millimeters. It would look, you'll see that the corona will look a little more spectacular had I done it at 200. Or,
is the bracketed feature on your camera? That's on the camera already, right?
no, actually, that was I got that from Magic Lantern.
No, I thought there was a bracketed feature on the
Keep in
camera.
mind, my cameras have brackets which you can do, you can do 3 exposures. If you put Magic Lantern in, you can do many more.
Okay.
Yeah, this one I think I did 6. Yeah, I had 6 different exposures. I don't have it here on my computer on my jump drive, but yeah, it was 6 different exposures. Yeah, in my book bag over there. We'll look at that afterwards. But anyway, yeah, that's one exposure. Now, when I combine all my bracketed exposures, you can kind of see the prominence here. I didn't get those to show up in my bracketed combined HDR image. You get something like that. So you get to see the sun's atmosphere a lot better. And had I had less than 600 millimeters, my longer exposures would have shown the corona way far away from the eclipse, from the actual eclipsed sun. Okay, yeah, the eclipsed sun would have been smaller, but if you want to see the grandeur of the sun's atmosphere, yeah, 600 millimeters is way too much. Okay, so, but there are some cases where longer focal lengths let you look at some really interesting features during a solar eclipse. So there's that.
Are those little bright spots like mountains on the moon or something?
Those, actually, no, those, if you look at, that was something I was not able to process in when I was combining my bracketed exposures. That is light coming from these prominences that are coming off the edge of the sun. So it's like, this is the longer exposure, so it's not really super sharp, but you see it, it almost looks like it's mirrored a little bit. So I don't know if that's a camera effect there or if that's actually light coming off and hitting the moon there. Do what?
They look that red on the sides. I've seen the photos.
You see the photos? Okay, so that the light is real.
It's almost like it's just little mini like gases just
Solar
bubbling over
flares.
the sun.
Oh,
Not a
yeah,
flare, it's
off the
just-
sun, yeah, off the
It's
sun.
where it's just kind of coming out through the side.
Yeah,
And so
off the
it'll
sun,
look
yeah,
that
that's what, you're definitely gonna see that, but, yeah, but it's this part, I don't know if that's actual glare that's on the moon or not. I mean, I don't know. So, anyway,
What, you mean the red that shows up in the
yeah,
black?
on the moon itself, yeah.
Yeah, that's just diffraction.
Okay,
For
so,
sure.
really, for the moon?
Yeah, light will tend to wanna, diffract.
I mean, does that mean,
around
is
an
it,
edge,
well, the only way I'm thinking about that is just gravity. I was like, there's that much gravity doing that?
No, it's not gravity, it's just the particles of light tend to, just like water tends to take a surface, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I know it from, yeah, okay, I feel stupid. Yeah, I've seen it here on Earth, so, yeah, you're right, okay. So, yeah, so I see what you're saying because, yeah, the sun, when it comes up and you're able to look at it, and there's enough, like, ocean spray or mist in a way, it does look a tad oblong.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So, yes, that, okay. So, this was at Carolina Beach back in 2011, almost, no, was it 2011? No, 2013, and what was that, 6 years ago? It was almost exactly 6 years ago because it was in November. We had a partial solar eclipse just ending here on the East Coast. So I made sure that I went to the beach because I wanted to get a really nice look at the eclipse coming above the water, and also not just because of the water being a nice foreground object, but because I wanted to see most of it. Because as it was coming up, that moon was coming out of the way, okay? We were just seeing the end of it. I think Bermuda got to see the whole thing. But anyway, so that was a memorable experience. And then this one was taken by Steve Christensen. This is the diamond ring effect. Why don't you talk about this?
This is, as I said, I was using, before the eclipse, I was using neutral density filter. And then it's just as the eclipse did, I took the neutral density filter off and using basically this setup right here. Just basically took a whole bunch of photos, just one right after another, at given exposure, hoping that I would get something. And so I took, I don't know, it's every 10 seconds or something like that. I can't remember the exact exposure. I just took a picture, one right after as long as it was going on. And then as soon as we were done shooting these pictures and totality was over and we stopped watching it, we all raced to our cameras to see if we got anything. We had no idea if we were getting anything. And I started clicking through the pictures, and lo and behold, I found that I had got the diamond ring and some of the prominences, the red stuff that's on the surface like that. And so we were really pleased that we got anything, because we had no idea. We'd never done this before, so we were pleased to do that. But it was basically a simple setup like this. And I have there's other ones as well, but the diamond ring, and was that one of mine, one of yours?
No, that's Joe Pettit's.
Oh, yeah. Is that Joe Pettit?
Yeah, it's Joe Pettit.
That's Joe.
nice.
God, I'm similar to that.
So this is right at totality, and he did a long exposure to get some of the things to show up in the night sky. Now, this bright object over here actually is Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
So right here, and somewhere in here there's Mars, but I haven't been able to find
Mars
it.
is in there too. One of mine has Mars in it, yeah.
What is the star?
Somebody sees it, come up and point at it. No? Okay.
It's a little closer, I think, than Jupiter, but I may be wrong about that.
It looks like there's something down below your cursor.
Do what?
Looks like there's something straight down from your cursor. Not
That wouldn't
far
be
down.
Mars, cause Mars is gonna be part of the eclipse.
Should have been like, yeah, running from here to there somewhere. Maybe that's it right there.
Planets in the sun,
Oh, yeah,
everything's
you're
always
right.
gonna be
Yeah,
Mars.
It's there.
I'll move my eye, I see something different.
Anyway, okay.
One more question, sir.
Yeah.
When I take picture, also I Eclipse in Apex, my backyard.
Yeah.
I get the light. He said his picture is all black, sky black, and just is Eclipse with what you call I think 5% eclipse, 95% eclipse.
Yeah, no, no.
But you have a lot of
Corona.
the corona.
Yeah,
How
corona.
can you set them? And I don't know.
How are you able to get the corona to show?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can. I don't know how much of the corona you could get to show up at 95%, but totality, it's really easy to get it to show up. Okay, so I mean,
You really need totality to
Yeah.
see the corona. The sun will just overwhelm anything else.
One person, I don't think you'll.
But that diamond
Show
ring
you
was
where
what,
Mars
just
is.
a split second after
Yes,
the end?
yeah, that's why I see.
If it was longer than that, you would have damaged the camera,
If
right?
if I had taken pictures at just a slightly different time, I probably would have missed it other things.
And ruined your
You're right.
camera, yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, I can show you where Mars is.
so it was that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very
I have
good.
2013 vision, so.
That mom.
Yeah. Right. Right about.
Right there,
There.
yeah.
Chris,
Mhm.
can you zoom in into the? Wow.
Yeah.
So that's the ecliptic, that's why.
No, there it is.
So it's like on that same plane.
Over there. There's the eclipse. There's Jupiter.
And you
Okay.
could, I forget what star was in Leo, the main bright one.
There's,
That was Regulus.
Regulus?
Yeah.
But that was
it's
visible.
right next to
Yeah.
the.
That was visible when the totality was happening, which you can't see there, but.
You can see it in there, but it's.
Maybe like up here or something. Okay. All right, so yeah, this did take 2 hours. I'm gonna have to race through that. It's okay. So astro nightscapes. Now this is mostly what I'm talking about here is mostly short exposures, but again, yeah, the dark side will all depend on what you're trying to get to show up in your photo with when you want to increase your exposure time. But when I talk about astro nightscapes, I just mean like the moon for the skyline, the conjunctions and things like that. And also, well, solar eclipse is not really a nightscape, but lunar eclipse, you know, you can get a nice nightscape with. But again, 20 millimeters or less is nice. But here's the most important thing that we're going to talk about in the next two photo ops: the 500 rule. Okay. So when the objects in the night sky start to move, okay, you don't want to have trailing or smearing of the objects on your camera. So something you may be thinking to yourself is like, well, how long can my exposure be without the trailing being obvious, okay? Well, somebody came up with the 500 rule, and what it is you take the number 500, divide it by the focal length of your lens, and this will equal the number of seconds you can take your image before you start to see trailing, okay? So, like say for example, the 50 millimeter lens here, if I take a picture of the night sky with that, I can only go up to 10 seconds, okay? So 50 will go into 500 10 times, right? So just take your, just take whatever focal length you're using, divide by 500, and that's your maximum exposure. Now, of course, I could use my 600 millimeter telescope there, and for something like the solar eclipse, it still is actually usable. It's only 0.75 seconds, okay? And that's pretty damn bright for something like a solar eclipse. So it's perfectly usable for a solar eclipse, but in most other cases, or actually, you can also use it for the moon. That would be useful for the moon too. But if we're trying to capture other things like the foreground objects or anything else around the moon, like conjunction objects, 600 millimeters is just way overkill. So anyway, I'm not going to do stellarium for this.
Don't
Short
forget
on
the
time.
crop factor on the camera too. So if you're using 50 millimeter, you've got a 1.6 crop factor. You've got to factor that in. So then you've got a 80 millimeter equivalent. So when you do the math, you've got to factor in the crop factor of that. So
That's true. I didn't think about that.
Show us the stellarium.
What?
Show us the stellarium.
Show stellarium?
Is that in non-full frame cameras, the crop factor?
yeah. So if you've got an APS-C, you've got a non-full frame, you've got to factor that into your focal length of your lens.
So anyway, well, stellarium again. What I was going to go to was actually showed a solar eclipse here again, but the problem is this is set to the coordinates of Cameron Village, so we didn't get totality here. That's why I'm going to show stellarium. But once again, stellarium's a nice little program. You can alter time. You can see things in the future. Hey, we're going fast in time. There's the Big Dipper right there. Okay, there's the moon. So you can go on the moon, we can center it. You can see there it is. You can zoom in, look at it. This is what it's currently at, the phase it's currently at. This tells you all the information you can possibly want to know. Some of it's customizable, so you don't see some of this junk. But yeah, stellarium, I highly recommend it. So, and it's free. And it's on Mac. Linux too, I think.
It's really useful. You can select your lenses and all that. You can see.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So,
in the picture.
yeah. Let me I can show that at least. So, say like this, and let's see. So that's that's 20 millimeters, right there. Let's do equatorial. So now we're square. Okay, just for our purposes, and we zoom in. And this is what you'll see at 20 millimeters, well, for the most part. Okay, and this is a 20 millimeter lens. You can put all your settings in up here as far as what kind of cameras you have, what are the sizes of the sensors. In this case, 600D. That's what this guy is up here. And if I had a 20 millimeter lens, this is what I would see. So. But anyway, yeah. Leonids looks like this is where the Leonids would be. Okay, so nightscapes, just regular nightscapes. You already saw this. This is over at Cary. I guess my dedication to the troops, Veterans Memorial in Cary. So you had the moon, and you had Venus, the goddess of love, the love of your country. In times of war, Mars, the god of war. Okay, so we had the planets Mars and Venus in conjunction with the lunar eclipse, and I was just thinking about that idea. Oh, let's go and put the memorial in there. I live less than a mile away from the memorial, so that was fun. So this is at 50 millimeters with this lens, and yeah, and this camera. There you go, and this tripod. Okay, so and I did use the intervalometer for that. Okay, and then this is the one that you saw at the very beginning, the Ansel Adams looking thing that Joe Pettit did. Okay, this is we'll get to that. That's the long exposure part.
Can you tell how you took that, or the last one?
The what? Which one?
That one with the Milky Way, the last one you just showed.
Oh, this, we're getting to that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So long exposure and sort of Milky comes into play. The darker the site, the better. Again, choose a focal length of less than 20 millimeters, and you are going to have to obey this 500 rule here. Okay. Now, like the star trails, if you take a bunch of shorter exposures, what you can do to minimize the chances that your camera had shook in one of those exposures and messed it up, if you take shorter exposures, what you can do is you can almost equate to the amount of time in each of those, the additive amount of time in those shorter exposures to a longer exposure. So say like I take 10 1-minute exposures, okay? If I'm able to manipulate the photo of what I took just enough, I could probably make it look as if it were a 10-minute exposure, okay? And what does that mean? That's why I put all these question marks down here. It's a concept called stacking, okay? And there's different kinds of software that do it. And so before that, we'll look at examples. We just saw Steve's sort of example right there with this big panoramic there. This is Joe Pettit's example. You know, this, I want to say this is Mesa Verde. So he had a huge ISO on this one. F4, 14 millimeters, and right there, there's the Andromeda Galaxy. So there's your Milky Way. That's Steve's. You'll learn about that later. So, and then this is also Steve's. You'll learn about that later, but I'll go ahead and tell you what it is anyway. So this is back during the lunar eclipse of January. So as the moon was going into the Earth's shadow, obviously the light coming from the moon went down. And so here at totality, there was not as much light, and therefore it's not as bright here. Now when it got past that, because this is a very long exposure, it gets bright again. So you get kind of this neat effect with, along with the star trails that you see here. Yeah, nice. This is in your backyard or your front yard? Front yard. And once again, some guy named Steve Christensen. So I like the way this look turned out. I mean, I got the clouds radiating out of it, and got a nice. Is this a single shot or is it stacked?
It's a single shot. It's pure serendipity.
Yeah. So
I was trying to shoot the Milky Way in Stanton River, and it's the same place I took that one in a different.
I bet you wish you would have done it stacked now, right?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a single exposure. So this is another example of what a single exposure will get you. Okay. So you can get a nice looking exposure here, but you start to expose the imperfections of your camera, like the noise from the ISO, the noise that's in the camera, no matter what your ISO is, and it kind of obscures the beauty of the picture itself. When you do take stacking software, not only does it enhance the quote brightness of, like in this instance, it would have enhanced the brightness of the Milky Way, it also filters out the noise, because the noise isn't always going to be on the pixel where a signal photon had hit in the first place. So like one 30-second exposure he took, there was noise in that one pixel somewhere on here. Next 30-second exposure, a signal hit from the object they were photographing. A photon from the Milky Way hit. Next exposure, well, noise hit again. Next exposure, oh, well, more than one photon from the signal hit. So eventually, what's going to happen is, because the same pixel is being exposed to, say, like this star right here, the amount of signal that's hitting that pixel in each of those exposures, when you add them together, you're obviously going to have a picture that has more signal than noise. Okay, does everybody follow that? It's kind of a complicated concept. I'm just winging it here, but
Chris, I've got examples of that Vernier photo on here. If this would, I don't know if this dongle would attach to that. I can show the Vernier stacked and unstacked.
Okay.
If we got time, then I'll do that later.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see what else we have. Okay. So here's one from Joe Pettit, and here's you can barely see him here because he just took a bunch of exposures and put them together. It didn't really enhance anything, but like the stars right here, you have 1, 2, 3. That's Orion's belt. There's his sword, that brightest central area of the sword. That's the Orion Nebula. But here we have meteors emanating from a point right over here. Okay, And this is the Gemini meteor shower. And here are the two heads of the constellation Gemini, the twins. And so the reason why they call it Gemini, the Geminids, is because when Earth intersects the debris trail from a comet that caused all these little meteors to come in, we are coming around the sun, and then all of a sudden over here, Gemini is lined up perfectly with this debris orbit that came from a comet. And once we hit that, we look up in the night sky towards the constellation Gemini, and we see all that debris coming in and making these streaks from the meteors. And that's kind of a nice effect that you can get with wide angle photography there. But you have to be in a kind of a dark place to do this. So anyway, so that's with the 6mm lens. Let's see, I think that's it. Yep, that's it. Okay, so that's all the pictures I have to show, but this is something I want to run through quickly here. Processing your images. Now, when I talk about increasing signal to noise, because your pixels are going to pick up the exact same photons as long as they're tracking the night sky, and we're going to get into what the next step is as far as tracking goes. Those same photons will roughly be on the same part of the sensor at every single exposure. Okay, and because of that, you'll begin to overwhelm the additive effect of all those exposures if they were put together. That there's more signal here than noise. You're increasing the signal to noise ratio. Okay, I have a good way to diagram this, but the damn dry erase marker doesn't work. So if it's kind of complicated, all I can tell you is just look online, and that'll tell you everything. So anyway, yeah, so you want to get out noise from whether it be from gain and whether it be from just inherent noise in the camera, whether it be thermal noise or just biased noise that's in the camera itself that result from long exposures. Okay, and you know, put them together, add them together, you'll get the average value of each pixel. Most likely the average value will be signal, not noise. So, but anyway, you already said what that is. I'm trying to hurry up here because technically I only have 3 minutes. So this is a single exposure image, and then this, I forgot to give this guy credit, but here's a stacked image right here. So he was focused on the Milky Way right here. Fortunately, I wish he would have done this side because he has some nice nebulae right here, hydrogen alpha light coming out of those. And if you stack these images together, this is what you're going to get right here. So it looks a little cleaner. I think he still stretched the histogram a little too much in this one, so it still looks a little noisy. But that's what happens when you stack multiple images together. The image, the noise gets cleaned up, and you can start to see what you want to see a lot better. So there's that. Next, how do you remove camera noise? If stacking isn't the only thing, isn't going to remove it totally. What you can do is you can do dark frame subtraction. Some cameras already had that option loaded onto them. And what dark frame subtraction is say like you have thermal noise from your camera from whether it be hot pixels or amp glow that comes from the heat of the camera sensor. You're going to see it on your exposures. So how do you get rid of that? Well, you can use stacking programs. I don't have Deep Sky Stacker on here. That's a free program. I recommend that. Nebulosity is not that expensive. PixInsight is very expensive, but very useful if you want to do all kinds of astrophotography. But you can also remove noise in Photoshop. You can use GIMP, which is free, and again, PixInsight, which is really expensive, but again, it's very versatile. So you can do dark frame subtraction in those programs, but again, like I said, some cameras already have that option loaded onto them. And the way it works is that if you cover up your camera, any thermal noise that showed up, including ambient or amp glow that showed up from the camera lens, or excuse me, the camera sensor, because that's what was on the sensor at the first place, and that's what it recorded. You can subtract that from your image and say, okay, there's this glowy effect over here that came from my sensor. It's not real. So if you take your dark frame, you subtract it from your image, and it gets removed. Okay. So, and the best way to, or in the processing software that I recommend for that is Photoshop, GIMP, or PixInsight, and Deep Sky Stacker. So this isn't really a good example, but this is the best example I could find. You know, I was in a quick bind to find an example of this because I really feel like processing any of my images to make them look noisy. So this is a single exposure that's noisy, and then this is an exposure that's had dark frame subtracted. So it looks cleaner, it's not perfect because it's not a stacked image, okay? But you kind of see the effect of what's going on there. Stretching your histogram. So again, if you kept your image in RAW format, it's most likely going to be a 16-bit image. And 16-bit images versus 8-bit images, the higher your bits, the more shades of color, grays, and whatnot you're going to have in that information that was recorded on your exposure, okay? So if you have lots of shades, if you stretch the histogram, which is the values of each of the pixels, the light values of each of the pixels, you're going to see that dim pixels are over here at dark, okay? Brighter pixels will be over here to the right, okay? Most cameras show it. Actually, I already shut it off, okay? My utility on here will show it, but you'll see that the histogram is mostly oriented with the lower signal or the darker shades of color or black and white around the left, and on the upper side or on the right side, you'll see the more brighter shades, okay? So what if you have like shades of the nebulosity that are here on the dark side? Well, what you can do is you can go into Photoshop and you can manipulate the histogram to get those shades to show up better. So technically you're not really manipulating the data. I mean, it's there, but you're just contrasting it and getting it to show up. I mean, you know, when you're in court, if you're like looking at security camera photos and you want to stretch the histogram on that, that's not cheating, it's real evidence, right? So same thing here. No, am I right? I mean, it would be admissible if it were, right? So anyway, so that gives you an idea. So that's a stretched stacked image. This is, actually I had those switched, sorry. This is the stretched image, and this is the unstretched image, okay? So this is a stacked image, and stacked images are, can handle stretching more so than single exposures or noisy images, okay? Because when you start to stretch the image, you're going to start to also stretch the shades of noise as well, okay? So a stacked image will tolerate lots of stretching of the histogram. I wish I had an example opened up here to show you how stretching works, but best thing I can tell you is just look online and it'll explain everything. So, the end, question mark. So we're going to go ahead and get these guys to come up and show some of their photos, but the next, if you want to take the next step, you can go to tracking, okay? This opens a whole can of worms and also empties your wallet, per se, okay? So if you wanted to go beyond the 500 rule and you want to track things across the night sky, well, you're going to have to track those objects at the rate that the Earth is rotating. And so this is probably the best example I can have if you want to go with just a camera, just a tripod, and simple tracking. This is called a Star Adventure. This is one iteration of it, but Steve has another kind over there, so why don't you talk about that, Steve?
All right. Well, at some point I decided I wanted to have an equatorial mount that actually did something before I got all the stuff I got now. So this is several years ago. This is a Skywatcher Star Adventurer mount. It's an equatorial mount. It has a polar alignment. You're pointing toward the North Star like this as best you can. And then it has a weight to it to adjust for the weight of the camera. The camera, this particular camera has extra battery on it if I want to do something really for a long time. I like to put a ball mount on it because it's just easier to move the camera around to get it to what I want it to be. And then this will track the sky pretty accurately. So I can go from what I might be able to do 45 seconds to a minute exposure on just a tripod for something, again, based on the 500 rule. With this one, I can go 2 or 3 minutes, maybe up to 5 minutes if I get polar alignment really well done. Okay, so this is the kind of thing to start with on a decent sort of heavier tripod mount, because this is kind of really normal. And so this is a very good initial setup for just doing camera type things. You can also put small telescopes on it. I've done that, and that also works. 11 pounds, I've gone up to 12 pounds or something like that with this. So you kind of want to minimize it, so maybe putting the extra battery on is not good. You can run this with USB power. It has batteries in it right now, but the batteries might tend to wear out after a while. So you can plug USB power into this to keep it working for multiple hours. And it's a very nice thing. I've packed this in my suitcase when I travel, and it's something you can carry along with you if you're going to a place where
That was really useful during the eclipse right there.
Yeah.
So I had a 600mm
Yeah.
telescope. I wish I had that.
Right. So this kind of thing is just easier to transport and put in the suitcase on the plane. So
Does it have, is it a computerized tracker, so will it help you locate celestial objects, or do you have to aim it?
No, it doesn't
You
have
gotta
any
aim
of that.
it, yeah.
But you can, if you connect the computer up to your camera, okay, then you can do something called plate solving, where you take a picture and it tells you where you are in the sky, where your camera's pointed. Okay, then you can move it around and take another picture, and it'll tell you where you are, and you can sort of hone in on exactly where you want to be with this if you want to do that. Usually you don't do, 100mm is probably as much as I would put on this thing. I might do more like 50mm, even 24mm to get something better, and especially if I put the camera that has the hydrogen alpha filter on it with a sort of more wide angle that I need to have longer exposures. This kind of thing would be very good for that. These days, I would use my more expensive stuff that I've got to do these kind of things. But especially if you want to travel, then this is the kind of thing you can do, and it does very well. It gives you a couple more minutes of exposure. Yeah.